All right, well, I guess I'll go ahead and get started. Is that, you good with that? Okay, all right. Well, good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. My name is Andy Salo. I'm with Inocybe. In case you don't want to see this Inocybe presentation, we've got like the all Inocybe channel going on in different rooms all at the same time right now. So if you want to flee my conversation, you go listen to another Inocybe session. So I'm going to be talking about use cases and concentrating on what people are actually deploying, because we're involved in a lot of different projects and have been for a number of years with OpenDaylight. We've been involved in OpenDaylight since 2013, so since the original release, and have been committers ever since. And so what I thought I'd do is first start and just kind of highlight some of the top use cases that we see, that we know that people are actually deploying because we're involved in those deployments. And then I'm going to talk about what is often a common issue in larger organizations that, of course, where OpenDaylight is and people are trying to leverage SDN and separation of control plane and data plane in those large networks. A lot of times in large organizations, you just have problems just getting it over the goal line or getting it started, getting the project started. And so I'm going to talk about some tips and tricks around that. And then also kind of finish with a little bit of discussion on ROI, because that kind of feeds into that internal championing that needs to take place. So that's going to be my discussion here today. And feel free to ask questions either in the middle or at the end is fine. All right. Yes?
You mentioned ODL as orchestration tools. Is there any concrete use case, or if it's okay for you to disclose company names, especially telco side? Are they using ODL as orchestration tools at all?
The answer is yes. I specifically didn't put company names in this presentation, but I'm going to talk about the type of company that it is, and then in some cases you might be able to guess. But absolutely, I mean, people are using ODL and using orchestration, and I would say that it's definitely beyond, and where we normally get involved in a project where somebody's already started down a path and they've done like a proof of concept and they're trying to get something going in their environment, and then they just need help actually getting it into kind of a production state, sort of a commercial grade type of state. So, so they are doing that.
Right. I mean, is it possible for you to drill down into a little bit details about what kind of orchestration that you see customers are doing? Because different sectors, right? Could be routing, could be cable, could be any.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Let me touch through. I'm going to go through these use cases, and then let me circle back on your question, and maybe I'll answer it as I go along.
We have particularly interest in orchestration, using orchestration tools.
Right.
And ODL was one of the possibilities, and if we can learn from other use cases, that's great.
Okay. All right. Excellent. All right. So let me just start with the first one here, which is traffic engineering with BGP and PCEP. This is, the diagram is sort of a typical diagram that you would see of, you got multiple ASs, so multiple IGPs with, presumably running OSPF linked with BGP. So that's sort of the traditional network that's been deployed for arguably decades at this point. And really what you're trying to do in this type of environment is apply that separation of control plane SDN functionality into it. We've got large operator customers that are deploying this way. They're doing it for WAN optimization. The protocols that you're using here is BGP-LS, PCEP, BMP, where BMP is more of the bulk collection of the BGP routing tables. It's and then sort of the goes into and the goes out is the link state, and then PCEP going down into the network. So I think what most organizations use these for, the benefits you see here, bandwidth scheduling, being able to do automatic bandwidth allocation, path computation, right? Optimal path computation. So this is a very much a kind of a bandwidth optimization, which kind of gets to ROI that I'll talk about later, right? But it's it's being able to be flexible and be able to do things dynamically. And that's what this use case is all about. So this is what we help engineer for our customers. That's one. Another is Netcom. Netcom, that's just a broad brush subject because it's really about configuration. And what this involves is you can have any number of devices and any types of devices. It's very typical in a heterogeneous networking environment. And sometimes this is referred to as the tail F use case, right? And wanting to do that in ODL. We have some organizations that started down a path with tail F, and then they decided, you know what, let me try to do this in ODL natively. And that's what this enables you to do. So this is really involving primarily the Netcom protocol and being able to work with those different devices and configure them and maintain them. And you may have an app layer on top of this. Frankly, you probably have that in the previous use case as well, right? So ODL as being that interface between the northbound and southbound, there's typically an app on the northbound as well. Yes, Bo.
Do you have any examples in your slides that talk about why they migrated from tail-F to OpenDaylight in your use cases? Or?
Yeah, well, I can just tell you, and that it's largely, tail-F, the acquisition by Cisco was a couple of years now, probably maybe 2.5 years. We have organizations that started down a path and they had things deployed, and then they didn't, for one reason or another, didn't like the direction things were headed, or things changed within their organization, and they wanted to leverage something that was truly open source, and maybe the pricing wasn't compatible with what they originally thought, and so things.
They cheap.
Right, exactly, and so they're looking for other alternatives, other ways to solve the problem. All right, so the next one is optical device management. Arguably, this sort of builds on the previous two in a way. There's a whole host of different protocols that can be involved here. This is, I would say, very typical for mobile operators, people who have large optical networks. And as you see here, you have different networks that are being connected over an optical backbone. Sometimes this is, considered an NFV type of use case where people are trying to virtualize the PCE, in this case, into the transport. So transport PCE could be OpenFlow, BGP Netcom. It's most often BGP and Netcom for sure, and it could be OpenFlow if that's what's desired, within some of those networks that you see there, right? So this is one of those use cases that is also about WAN optimization in a way, but it's also about just being able to configure and control the optical devices. So that tends to be the driver for it. The driver for the project is maybe really just the optical management, but then there are other sort of sub-use cases that get leveraged as well. Okay, so let me continue with PacketCable. So this is very only applicable really to the cable operators, and where this is cable operators have a very traditional architecture of CMTSs, which are $1 million pieces of equipment that speak DOCSIS and control cable modems and all the end users' devices, thousands upon thousands of end user devices, and they do that from the head end, what's known as the head end. And so within that head end, there's a whole set of equipment that is, if anybody's been in a head end, anybody work at a cable operator or been in a head end? So we've got at least one. Usually you go into just these giant rooms, and it's just racks and racks and racks of pizza boxes, and a lot of RF equipment, et cetera. But what those operators are trying to do is sort of take that head end into the next generation, and do that with that control plane separation, and that's why OpenFlow is great for that. And that is enabled through through the PacketCable Multimedia PCMM plugin, which basically ties it into OpenDaylight. So that's the use case there, and it's very common. Yes?
I mean, there's already active deployment of this solution in any telco companies or?
Yeah, in fact, I think Comcast was just speaking about it earlier today.
Comcast is using this kind of solution?
Yes, that's right. And there are others for sure, and it's all tied in through Cable Labs, and Cable Labs, we've worked a lot directly with Cable Labs and worked with other companies that are deploying in this way. And then the final use case I'll touch on is VPN management. This can be for really both mobile operators, but also very large enterprises, or a combination of the two sometimes, because sometimes it's connecting up enterprises across that, across some sort of backbone, where you, again, probably have heterogeneous networking equipment. And just to go off on a tangent there for a second is, a lot of times OpenDaylight is used within that context of, I've got a disparate network with a lot of different equipment, and so therefore I want something that isn't necessarily coming from a specific vendor, because then what am I going to do about the other vendors? So it's a common theme, I would guess, I'd say, within many of our projects. And for this one in particular, it's all about dynamic L2, L3 VPN management. So there's a lot of Netcom and kind of the BGP, PSEP type of set of protocols. So that's sort of, I would say these are the arguably the top five. There are literally dozens upon dozens of variations of these use cases and others that we work with. As far as smarts, we do work with smart city type of deployments and POCs. That's a little bit earlier. We do IoT work that we've partnered with companies like Avaya. And so there's a lot of different use cases. But as far as SDN and sort of what we refer to as tip of the spear, these are very, very typical, the ones that you see here. And by the way, we have all these that I just went over, these five, before I jump into some of the championing that I was going to mention. All of these are available on GitHub under Inocybe, and are also on our platform that you can sign up for. We have a SaaS platform that enables these and creates these distributions, and we have like turnkey recipes that create all of these. Okay, so let me talk about like how you actually start one of these projects. I'm going to go over some steps that I think are applicable to this, but they're also broadly applicable. I've been in product management for 15 plus years, and these are tried and true techniques to kind of get any large project underway. It's often the same type of thing that you need to do. So the first is you need to find a champion. And I would say for the projects that we're talking here, ODL, chances are you are the champion. So if you're at this summit, you are the champion. I was thinking about Jeff Foxworthy, comedian. Anybody know who Jeff Foxworthy is? Okay, I got one person, two. Okay, all right. So you might be a redneck guy, right? So it's like if you mow your lawn and find your car, you might be a redneck. If you're at the ODL summit and you're meeting all your friends, you might be a champion for SDN. So for that, really, what you need to start out with is building a business case. All right, not often that will involve the ROI. And one of the key things that I always encourage people to do is just start small. Right, like you probably know if you're going to deploy ODL, you probably can think of like 5 to 10 things that you can use it for, but you don't need to do that to start out with. You just need to find one that sort of gets it in the door, and then go from there. So I always encourage people to somewhat start small, build a strong ROI, and then those other use cases, they can piggyback on that. The other key thing is just to find your allies. In a large organization, you got to be working. If you're on the architecture team, you need to know the ops guys really well, or the engineering guys, or whatever it is. Whoever you will know who the stakeholders are, and you need to get their buy-in. I use the example of Survivor, building alliances, Hunger Games, same way. You got to find your friends and help build that business case. So I sometimes refer to this as a Trojan horse strategy, right? Get it in the door under one pretext, right? And then work from there. It starts with building the solid ROI. One of the key things is about selling internally. Internal selling is an art form. It's one thing I always tell product managers is like the number one job description is you have to be able to internally sell, which is different from internal sales. It's selling your idea. And one of the ways that I do this is with a sort of a pre-sell strategy meeting. So one of the things I always like to do when I'm kicking off a large project is I call a strategy meeting. Because if there's one way to get everybody at executive level or wherever you need, whatever level you need to show up for a meeting, call it a strategy meeting, and you guarantee attendance. But the key is when you have that meeting, don't show up to that meeting to go get people to agree. Get everybody who accepted the meeting and go have a meeting with them before you have the meeting. So that's called pre-selling. So if I've got Bob, Joe, Tim, and Mary coming to the meeting, I'm going to go talk to every single one of them individually and kind of pre-sell them before I get to the meeting. So I know that when I get to the strategy meeting, it's a foregone conclusion what is the result is going to be because I already have all their buy-in. So that's a little tip from many years of experience. And then the key is focus. Don't boil the ocean. So keep it small, keep it simple, something people can understand. And then part of the way you get this done is I just like to say I say it's not what you say, it's how you say it. Getting people to buy into your idea is a lot of times if you're just excited and convinced about it and you just say it with such conviction, you'll get people excited about it. They can't help themselves. They're like, wow, he really seems to think this is a good idea. We should do it. So you got to sell the vision of it. The other thing that I always try to tell people is there's two ways. Well, there's a way that we think we make decisions, and there's a way that we make decisions. So we think we make decisions by logic. But it turns out through scientific study that we all make decisions based on emotion. And we justify that decision with logic. So if you can think about that way and empathize with the person that you're internally selling to, that goes a long way because you think about what is their emotion? What are they going to get out of this project, right? And it's going to be different. The finance guy, very different emotion than your fellow network architect who maybe wants to kind of geek out on the new technology. Finance guy wants to see the numbers. That's his emotion, right? So everybody has a different emotion, but then we justify it with logic. So you always want to sell people on the vision to give them that emotional response, but give them the logic to justify their decision. That's one of the keys, I think. And then another little sort of trick, maybe it's not as nice of a trick, but you sort of convince people it was their idea in the first place. If you can be selling them something, but there's so many times where somebody else will say something, or maybe they said something a little while ago, and it's you say, so you remember when you said, I really liked your idea when you were saying that we should do this and we would do that. I think I agree. We should do that, right? And so, you give them the answer to the thing that they said was their idea, and then they're going to be bought in, and then they are going to be your champion. So that's another often useful tool. And then I already mentioned the pre-buy-in from stakeholders. Always have that strategy meeting, call that strategy meeting, go have the pre-meeting, and then you come to the strategy meeting and you're done. Then you have approval. Okay, so then one key factor in this that I'll close on here with just a couple slides is return on investment. you can't have an SDN conversation without talking about ROI. It just doesn't exist. They go together. There's 3 key areas that you're going to get from the project from ROI. And the 3 are basically bandwidth savings, operational efficiencies, and CapEx efficiencies, right? So bandwidth savings often glossed over, but should not be overlooked because bandwidth is expensive. A lot of times, millions of dollars is spent on either initial charges or overage charges on bandwidth. So bandwidth is a big one. Operational efficiencies, sometimes harder to quantify, but you can do so with cost of people and how much time is spent on X, category, et cetera. But what you're really enabling there with SDN is self-service, DevOps efficiency, automation, right? And so you can put some numbers to that. And then you potentially have CapEx savings. Now, it's not always going to be the case that you have CapEx, at least not initially, but you could. If you're going to white box solutions or just have them more, if you have more flexibility to choose lower cost hardware because of the way you're doing things, then CapEx can definitely factor into the equation. So those are the 3 big buckets of ROI. And then one I really don't want to, I want to make sure I emphasize as well is, how do you speed up the ROI, right? And so yes, you can save on what happens once you deploy the project, but you can actually also save on the project itself, right? Just by condensing the timeline, because if it drags out forever, then that's going to reduce the ROI. So Gartner often refers to this as bimodal architecture, and I'm sure anybody heard of bimodal mode 2 Gartner? No? Okay, so Gartner looks at the world as 2 modes. There's mode 1 and mode 2. Mode 1 is for legacy, traditional architectures, things that have been in your data center for years and you can't touch. Like nobody can breathe too hard near those racks because something will break, right? So you don't touch that stuff. But what you need to do is have a mode 2 way of implementing and doing things. And that's more of an agile DevOps approach. And Gartner is all about pushing organizations to think more mode 2 to get new initiatives done. And SDN definitely fits into that category. And for that, I say you just say no to waterfall, right? Don't do long release timelines. You want to be able to do quick, iterative processes, sprints, either agile sprints or Kanban style continuous change, and you want to feed that in through a CI/CD type of environment, right? Have that pipeline going. So SDN is all about change, right? The only constant in the world is change, and you want to take advantage of what SDN is bringing you, and you want to be able to do it in this way, in an agile way. And you can do that by leveraging a platform, and that's why we actually offer the platform we do. It's like a Heroku-like, benefit to enabling that kind of CI/CD deployment. It allows for accelerated deployment and, most importantly, reduced infrastructure costs by using a SaaS platform. And then what we find, and our customers tell us, is typically it's in the range of anywhere from 30 to 70% savings in development timeline just from doing it in this way, like deploying in this way and thinking in this sort of model of quick iterative turns. So that is kind of the yin and the yang of the ROI. So first on the projects, on the deployment side, and then also speeding up the project. And then I'll finish with just sort of where we think organizations, as this presentation when it's titled, where they are today and where they're going, which is all these areas that you see here. So not only just SDN, tip of the spear, but I mentioned several of the others, such as smart cities, smart buildings, HVAC. I mean, just everything that you can think of can be leveraged by OpenDaylight, including electric utilities with SCADA support. So there's so many different applications in the IoT space and others that's why we're involved in OpenDaylight, why we're such big proponents. So all of those things that I mentioned there, I wanted to mention also that the ROI calculator or spreadsheet, I have the kind of math behind that, so if you want to use that as a template to get started, I can send that to you, so just shoot me an email, or there's at my Twitter address there as well, and I'd be happy to help. So thank you very much for coming, and let me know if you have any other questions.